yeah, until we open about thanks, Dad. I did help instead.
Okay, kia ora, I better start the lecture now. We are now on the downhill slope to the end of the trimester now. So I will just sketch out the plan for the next 2 weeks, including contingency planning. So today I'm going to lecture to you on the Personal Property Securities Act and secured transactions. I don't think I will get through all the slides. If I did, you'd probably be pretty confused because there's quite a lot of information in them. So my plan is that I will finish those on Thursday. We won't have a face-to-face lecture for that. I'm going to pre-record it and make that available to you. So that is partly for those of you who are COML310 students, so that I can ensure that I crack on and get your assignments marked, which I know you're very concerned about, and understandably. But I'm also sort of trying to build in contingencies because, as you may have seen in the media, we are going on strike. So I'm trying to do my bit for the union and at the same time make sure that you are okay. It's week 12 when we may be going on strike. I don't know if it's going to be this week or next week. I gather there's going to be an announcement. Week 12, that is the tutorial week. Your tutor, Martin, he is actually not a tertiary education union member, so he won't be going on strike. So tutorials will be going ahead, and definitely you should attend that tutorial. So in terms of remaining topics that we'll be covering, so this week we'll finish the Personal Property Securities Act, and then on Tuesday, or if we are on strike, I'll do it on Thursday, we'll just do a brief lecture on termination of contract and remedies, and I'll discuss the format of the final test. So this way we have got enough time to make sure we cover everything that we need to, but also building in some contingency time. I still haven't set your test, but I'm inclining towards making it really easy and not taking too long to mark. So I'm thinking it will be 2 or 3 questions, and it is very likely that as always, the tutorial content will be what is emphasised. And of course, it will be a 24-hour test, so you will have time to properly consult your notes, but not your classmates, to do it. And I just think, God, it's not on Inspira, since I had to spend yesterday morning emailing people who were not looking at the screen the whole way through an Inspira test, and I thought, oh, what a dehumanising and gigantic waste of time this is for everyone concerned. So glad I got a PhD in law so I can be emailing people to say you weren't looking at the screen for the whole time. Yep. Anyway. So any questions or comments about any of that? Okay, so we have our plan. So today we'll go through these slides as far as we get to. If we finish a bit early, if I feel like you've sort of had enough of it, because there's quite a lot of jargon in it, so if you're looking really stunned and confused, we'll maybe finish a bit early, but we'll just see how we go. And then finish it off in the recorded lecture after that. Okay, so this is week 11, so we're looking at secured transactions and the Personal Property Securities Act. This is actually a very complex and long piece of legislation with lots of different sections that apply to specific situations, which there's not much point in teaching you now. Most of you won't ever need to know all those exceptions. But if you do become some sort of an insolvency practitioner or work in that area, then you'll probably get to know it very well. But it is useful for everybody who is going to be, vaguely in a commerce field to know about. So we're kind of be giving you like the key points of it and trying to make a few connections to the stuff that you've learned in the rest of the course. So yes, again, this is in commercial law in New Zealand, which you've got to access through LexisNexis. Okay, so this is what we will be covering. So I'll do an introduction, and then we will be looking at enforceability. And I think most likely, if I get to there, I'll stop there, but I might stop before then, and then we'll finish off just looking at these other things. Okay, so the Personal Property Securities Act 1999, what is that about? So what it fundamentally applies to is what's called a security interest. So what is a security interest? Well, it's defined in section 17. It is an interest in personal property. Okay, so I've underlined personal property, and this is to emphasise a point that I think I made previously, which is that personal property is distinct from real property. So real property is to do with land. So it doesn't apply to land that's got its own whole regulatory regime with the Land Transfer Act and so forth, and you've got to register every transaction on the land registry. So this is to do with personal property. Now, we have talked about personal property before when we were looking at sale of goods, and I said, well, it is personal property. But in the sale of goods, though, as it's defined in there, it's quite narrow what is actually covered by the sale of goods. So it is basically, I remember we had a fun discussion about whether zombies are covered by it. So it is basically goods. It is not just basically, it is goods. It is chattels that you can see, touch, move, and it's not intangible personal property, which is things like intellectual property, some accounting stuff, which I don't really understand, so but you probably know more about than me. Things like book debts, I believe, can come under this definition. So there's a few things that are captured by it. So it's broader than just goods, like the Sale of Goods Act. So if you're super interested in that, you should have a look at section 17, and that has an extended definition of what is captured under personal property. So that's the first thing, it has to be personal property. And the next thing is that it is an interest in personal property, so it's not that you own it necessarily, it's just that you have an interest in it that secures payment or performance of an obligation. So that is at the heart what a security interest is. The form of the agreement is irrelevant, so you can have these in various forms. So it's not necessarily going to look exactly like this, but if in essence this is what the agreement is, the function of the agreement, then it is a security interest, and this is the legislation that will apply. Okay, so here is just an example of that, and also just to introduce some of the terminology. So this is the simple secured transaction. We've got person A, and they lend B money. And B promises that if he defaults on the repayments, A can take his shoe collection. Okay, so I don't know, maybe they're flatmates, and B spends all his money on shoes, so he's got this massive shoe collection. So that's all he's got in the way of wealth, and he borrows some money for rent, and he says, if I don't pay you back, then you can take my shoe collection. So that is a secured transaction. A is the secured party, the other person who has lent the money. B is the debtor. B is the person with the expensive shoe habit who's had to borrow the money. And A's claim on the shoe collection is a security interest. So it's the claim on the shoe collection. It's not the shoe collection, it's the claim on it. The shoe collection itself is collateral. Okay, so is that reasonably straightforward? You can see what's happening there. Okay, this is another type of secured transaction. So this is our old friend Ramalpa clauses from when we were doing sale of goods. And I made this about aluminium just to remind you about that Ramalpa case, which was also about aluminium. So in this instance, we've got a seller who sells a buyer some aluminium. The contract states that property does not pass to the buyer until the seller has been paid. So you see what they're doing there is they're displacing those assumptions in the sale of goods provisions by explicitly saying when property is to pass. They intend it to pass when the seller has been paid. And this is even if the aluminium is melted down and commingles with other aluminium. So they have given, they've delivered the aluminium, they just haven't been paid for it yet. So they've given physical possession, but they are trying to say, well, I've still got a claim on this aluminium until such time as I have been paid. So this is also a secured transaction because it fits under that definition that we talked about. It is an interest in personal property, so the aluminium's personal property, that's clearly something physical and tangible that you can move, and it secures payment or performance of an obligation. So the obligation is to pay for that aluminium. Okay, so the Raumaupō clause establishes a secured transaction. And looking at our terminology here, we've got the seller, they are the secured party, so they're the person that the money is owed to. The buyer is the debtor, they are the person who has to pay it. The claim on the aluminium is the security interest, and the aluminium itself is the collateral. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, so if it is a security interest, then the Personal Property Securities Act applies. So here is another distinction with a fun illustration. Okay, so you can have different types of security interests. So they can be possessory or they can be non-possessory. So a possessory security interest is one where the secured party takes physical possession of the collateral. So in our previous example of the Raumaupō clause, if the seller's delivered the aluminium to the buyer, they no longer have the aluminium, it's not in their possession. So that's a non-possessory security interest. This is an example of what a possessory security interest would be. So it's where the secured party, the person who's loaned the money, takes physical possession of the collateral. And I put this picture in here because it's a picture of a pawn shop, spelt P-A-W-N. So that's a shop like Cash Converters. So this is where you need to raise some cash fast. So actually I used to have a picture on here where it was the pawn shop specialised in guns and ukuleles, so that was their niche. So if you're in a situation where you needed to raise some money, I don't want to say to buy drugs, but you know, maybe, and you had a gun or a ukulele, you could take it to the specialist guns and ukulele shop and give it with them. And they would give you some cash and they would hold on to your gun or ukulele until you came and redeemed it. So if you don't come back and pay, then they've actually got possession of your gun or ukulele, so they can sell that to somebody else. If you do come back then and repay them, obviously with an interest charge on it, then you get your possessions back. So that's what a possessory security interest is, and this is just an example. So it's where the secured party takes physical possession of the collateral. So clearly that is when you're in the strongest position, if you've got possession of the collateral, because if the other party defaults, then you can just sell the collateral. You don't have to chase after it. But quite often you also have non-possessory security interests, which is where the debtor retains, or in the case of the Raumaupō clause, obtains physical possession of the collateral. Okay, so I hope you're getting a picture of the different types of security interests that there are. Does that all make sense? Okay then. Well, this leads into this slide here. So this is the thing which is quite good to know about. And this is the Personal Property Securities Register. Okay, so what the Personal Property Securities Act in 1999 did was, this was a real, if you read about it in your textbook, I think it talks about the law prior to 1999 as a quagmire. So some of you probably weren't even born then, so just imagine how awful it was for us then with dial-up modems and all sorts of things, and the quagmire of personal property securities law. Nobody knew what the legal status of Raumaupō clause was. There's no protection for parties. It was generally really hard back in those days. And the Personal Property Securities Act clarified quite a bit of that. So what it does, and what there was a lot of uncertainty about before, was enforcement of security interests in personal property when a debtor defaults. So this is when you have a security interest, but the debtor has not repaid you. And quite often what the problem will be is that the debtor will owe money to more than one person. So they will have used the same collateral to borrow money from multiple people. They're not paying anyone. So you've all got to basically fight over that collateral to try and repay yourselves. And quite often the collateral is not going to cover the money that is owed to everyone. So how do you resolve that? Well, the Personal Property Securities Act resolves that for you, because what it does is it provides for determination of priority between the security interests in the same property. So it's like, it says, right, you get first bite, you get second bite, you get third bite, etc. And to aid in that process and to sort of give people a bit more security when they're doing these kinds of transactions is they set up this Personal Property Securities Register. So this is just a website which anyone can use, and it's actually quite cheap to use. I haven't checked the prices before the lecture today, but last time I did, it's really cheap. It's just a couple of dollars to search and to register. I did have one student who was buying a car and he went and searched the car. And I'd never seen this student before actually, and it was a couple of years after I taught him, but he turned up at my office and I said, look, I searched Personal Property Securities Register. And it's like you said in lectures. I was like, oh wow, well that's good. I've helped this person in their life. I always like to feel I've done that. I'd swear I'd never seen him in my life, but probably he was sitting at the back. And he said, I can see there's a registered security interest on this. And I was like, right, well, you know what that means. So you can search it if you're buying something and see if there's a registered security interest on it. Or if you're lending somebody money with collateral. So that's good to know. The other thing is not only can you search it, you can register your interest on it. So the terminology that is used there is if you're a secured party, what you do is you register a financing statement. So financing statement is really just the web form that you fill out on this particular website. So not only can you do this, but as you're going to see, it actually becomes very important that you do this. This next slide might help to explain why. Okay, so I've given you a flavour of a range of different types of security interests that there are, and now I'm going to add a bit more detail to your knowledge. So there's that fundamental definition of what a securities interest is, which is an interest in personal property which secures repayment. So that if it's that in function, then it's a security interest. But then there are some other things which are also security interests. And they are security interests because the law says that they are security interests. So they have been added in. So this is one of the things which is deemed to be a security interest. And this is leases of a term of more than 1 year of personal property are deemed to be security interests. So this is relevant. There actually was a student in this class some years ago, and she had a little business where she was leasing really gigantic, nice pot plants to offices around Wellington. And she was very interested to know about this because it actually did have implications for her business. And it has implications for anybody who has a business where they are leasing things, personal property, for a term of more than 1 year. Okay, so the Act says that a lease of a term of more than 1 year is deemed to be a security interest. So if it's deemed to be a security interest, that means you can go to this website here and register it. Okay, so, and the act of registering is what really gives you the protection, because if you've registered it, you've said to the world, hey, I have this interest here, and that gives you priority. And we're going to look in more detail later on about the rules around priority. But as a general fundamental principle, if you've registered it, you've given notice to the world that you have this claim, and it gives you enforceable rights. So the idea being here that, well, probably, it would be nice to give people the ability to register the leases of personal property on this register because it gives you a bit more protection. Because potentially if you lease something like a big gigantic pot plant to someone, it's in their possession, so there's various things that they might do with it. So you might want to be sure that you can signal to the world that that's actually my pot plant, I have an interest in it. So that's what everybody thought, that's how the law was working. So it's just like, oh, this is a nice thing to do for people who have personal property that they can lease it, they can register it if they want to. But then this case came and it was actually a horrible surprise to a lot of people. So I'm going to tell you about this case now. Because what came out of this case is that actually you do have to lease it, you do have to register it. So let me just tell you what happened in this case here. So this involved this horse here. So this horse's name was actually Generous. He had a really exciting life. So he was Irish bred, and he won one of those big British horse races, maybe the Derby or something. And then he was retired for stud purposes. So he travelled around the world. I think he went to Hong Kong for a while. And then he ended up in New Zealand. And he was owned by these, I think, New Zealand bloodstock. So they had him, but they leased him out. So that was what happened to him. So he was personal property. And he was being leased out for a term of more than 1 year for stud purposes. So this horse had been leased out to some people, and they didn't realise that it was actually important to register that lease on the Personal Property Securities Register, because nobody had ever really thought that it was important. It was just like, oh, it's nice to do if you want to, but you don't have to. So they didn't register it. And the people that they had leased this horse to became insolvent. So, as will happen, the bank had a registered interest over all of their assets. So the bank had a debenture. So the bank was like, well, these people have gone insolvent. We're going to come in and, satisfy ourselves. We've got a registered interest in all of the debtors' assets. And the surprising thing that happened was that the horse that had been leased to those people was counted among the assets. So that meant that the bank took it. So that's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? Because you'd think, well, I lease it to you, but it's still mine. It doesn't become one of your assets. So do you see that logic there? I mean, like if I lease you, I don't know, a fridge, it's not yours. The idea is I can come and get it, and that was the same logic with the horse. But because of the operation of the Personal Property Securities Act, they said, well, it is a security interest. That means that you could register it. You didn't register it. So therefore, you lose priority, and the bank gets to take it. Okay, so it's a bit counterintuitive, and it was a bit of a horrible surprise to a lot of people because they didn't realise that that's what was going to happen. So the central key message for that now is that you should register it, otherwise you will lose priority in the event of an insolvency event. Okay, so any questions about any of that? Yes, apparently this horse had an interesting life. He travelled a lot, but apparently he also had a hard life. It was I can't remember where I read it. It was just an article saying he was never really well treated, and it was all a bit unfair. So, but probably a bit unfair too to the people who lost him. Okay, so I didn't put this on the slide, but for your general knowledge, I'm going to tell you about another type of deemed security interest. And again, this could be a thing which might be useful for you to know for your general knowledge. So if you go to your local cafe, or my local cafe anyway, sometimes you will see that they have got art on the wall, which you can buy. You see that? And it's usually not the cafe owner's art. So they've got it there on behalf of the artist, who's probably somebody local. So that's on consignment. That's what's called a consignment sale. So that if you buy it, they'll take the money, but they'll give the money to the artist. So those consignment sales are deemed to be security interests. So again, that means if that cafe owner becomes insolvent, that consignment could be deemed as part of their assets. So the bank or other secured creditor is just going to come in and take it if you haven't registered it. So there was a big case involving an Auckland interior design store, and they had a whole ton of stuff on consignment. It was various artists and artisanal furniture makers, and they were selling everything on consignment, and all of the makers and creators lost it, and the bank took everything because the security interests hadn't been registered. Okay, so any questions about that? So a useful piece of general knowledge if you are doing that sort of thing. Just going to stop and have a drink of water. Okay, so now we are going to start to dive more deeply into the technicalities of how this law works. And it's these two key concepts here that I'm going to be talking about, which is attachment and perfection. And they're kind of a bit weird and jargony because it's one of those instances where law has taken a word which has a meaning that you think you know what it means in a colloquial sense, but it's actually been given a sort of slightly extra meaning in the context of the Act. So I'm just going to talk you through these concepts here a bit. Okay, so the Personal Property Securities Act, so as you know, it provides for the enforcement of security interests in personal property. So it gives you the ability, if you are not paid, to assert your claim against the collateral. And it also, as we just discussed, provides for the determination of priority between security interests in the same property. So a concept that I've already introduced to you sort of by stealth is that if you haven't registered it, then you're going to lose priority against people who have registered. But going into more detail now, attachment and perfection, these are the two key concepts in the Act from which the right to enforce a security interest comes from when a debtor defaults, and which priority against other claims to the same collateral flows from. So it's just putting a word on things that we've sort of already been talking about. Okay, so this is section 40. So this provides for attachment. So attachment is what really gives you a right to enforce a security interest, and you can't enforce a security interest until attachment has occurred. So, when does a security interest attach to collateral? Well, it attaches when value is given by the secured party. So going back to our example of the shoe collection, you give value when you actually give your flatmate the money. So that's when you've given value. So up until that point, you can't just go randomly claiming other people's stuff. You've got to have given something of value. And the debtor has to have rights in the collateral. So it has to be his shoe collection. He can't give you rights to other people's stuff. He can only give you rights in stuff that he has a right to. So this is the most basic level of attachment. So this is when value is given and the debtor has rights in collateral. So this is sufficient to create an enforceable right between the parties to the security agreement. So say your flatmate doesn't pay you back, you can enforce your claim to that collateral. So you can say, right, well, I'm taking your shoe collection. But what happens if that same collateral has been used as collateral to various other debtors? So it's not just you that money is owed to. Then you will potentially be in a situation where you're trying to fend off all the other people and say, well, hang on, I lent him money, I need to satisfy myself. So what is it going to take for you to be able to enforce that claim against third parties when you're all competing for the same collateral? And I think it's a little bit confusing the way that this is also called attachment. I sort of think of it as attachment, next level attachment. And this is established under Section 36. So a security agreement is enforceable against a third party in respect of particular collateral. So this you're fighting off the third parties. You can only enforce it against them if you've taken possession of it. So that's pretty straightforward. So it's actually in your physical possession. And this is where it becomes a bit more tricky, if the debtor has assented to a security agreement that contains a description that identifies the collateral or a statement that the interest is in all of the debtor's present and after acquired property. So I'll put this into quite simple language here. What you need is to get it in writing. Okay, so that is what a security agreement is. It will be a written agreement in which they actually say, yes, there is a security interest in this collateral. And there does have to be assent. So I'm going to give you a very simplified summary of a thing that's happened in a case. So I'll try not to give you too much detail because you don't need it, it's not helpful. But it was competing people that were trying to get, it involved sleepyhead, so it was about mattresses. And the security agreement was on the back of the invoice. So it was just on the back. So it was just kind of there on the back and in fine print, and the back of it hadn't been signed. So the question was, well, had you actually assented to it? And the answer was no, that's not assent. For assent, it can't just be hidden away in the back of the invoice sort of after the goods have been delivered and the whole transaction is in place. For assent, it needs to be on the front of the document and specifically signed off. Otherwise, you cannot assert it against a third party. Okay, the other situation that you have to have, or could have, is a statement that the interest is in all of the debtor's present and after acquired property. Okay, so this is sort of perhaps giving you a bit more of a sense of the kind of situation in which this sort of thing arises. Sorry, it's a bit distracting for me. I'm really tired and struggling to remain coherent as it is. Okay. So this is an example of a statement that the interest is in all of the debtor's present and after acquired property. So this pertains to a kind of situation where you have lent somebody money to buy assets for a business, for example. So they can't actually go and acquire the collateral until you give them the money, but obviously you want to be protected as soon as possible. So this is how that would be worded. So on the 1st of January, you would say that the collateral is in all present and after acquired office equipment. So whatever they have on that date, the 1st of January, that's attachment has occurred to that. Because it's you've given value, you've lent them the money, and it's their collateral, it's in their possession. They use the money that you've given them on the 15th of January to buy a computer, and on the 15th of January, when they get a claim to that computer, that is when your interest attaches to it. So up until that time, it's somebody else's computer, so it's irrelevant to the transaction. It's only once they've got it that attachment occurs. Okay, so I was just going through these slides before the lecture, and even though I've taught this like a lot of times before, I was like, my God, this looks so confusing how I've done this. So I've split this over 2 slides, so hopefully it will be a bit less, maybe it wasn't even confusing, I was just tired because I was awake all night thinking, what is the future of tertiary education in this country? I am so concerned, so. But yes, I'm just going to give you a chance just to read through this slide, and hopefully it will actually be quite clear and straightforward, and if it isn't, I'm going to explain it to you. So. so this is just revising attachment. So we just went through this really. So we've got person A, who's the secured party, and they lend person B, the debtor, money. And B promises that if he defaults on the repayments, A can take his shoe collection, which is the collateral. So no security agreement is signed. So let's say B, this feckless flatmate with the shoe habit, he doesn't pay the money back. So the question is the security agreement enforceable against B? It's only going to be enforceable if attachment has occurred. So here we have section 40. So my question to you is, has attachment occurred? Yes? Do you all think yes? Oh, that's good, because that's the correct answer. Guess I wasn't quite as incoherent as I feared I was being. Okay. Right, so yes, attachment has happened here because value is given by the secured party. You've given him some money. He has rights in the collateral. It is shoe collection. So you can enforce this against B. Okay, on to the next slide here, which is the same one, just spread out more. So exact same set of facts. A secured party lends B, the debtor, money. B promises if he defaults on the repayments, A can take his shoe collection. No security agreement is signed. C, introducing a third party now, has also lent money to B, with the shoe collection as collateral. B has obviously defaulted. Both A and C want to take the shoe collection so they can pay themselves back. So the question is the security agreement enforceable against C by A? So if person A, the first person, is saying, hey, I have a claim to the shoe collection, is it going to be enforceable against A? And the answer to that will turn on section 36. So applying that. So my question to you, is it going to be enforceable against C? So what do you think, yes or no? Or it depends? Well, we can go through this together then. So section 36, a security agreement is enforceable against a third party only if the secured party has possession of the collateral. So if A has nipped in and taken the shoes, then he can enforce his claim against C. If he hasn't, then it will be dependent on whether the debtor has assented to a security agreement that contains a description that identifies the collateral or a statement that interest is in all the present or after acquired property. And what we're told here is that no security agreement is signed. So short answer here, if he's taken the shoes, section 36 is satisfied because he's got possession. If he hasn't taken the shoes, then he is out of luck because he has not got a security agreement assented to. So I think our key lesson there would be, get a security agreement signed. Yeah. Okay, and actually what we're going to go on to next is don't just get it signed, go to that website that I showed you and register it. Okay, so this is the next concept. So you've got to have attachment or you cannot have enforcement. But it's really just kind of a precursor. To have something that is going to give you the best chance of having something that is enforceable, what you need is perfection. So what is perfection? Enforceability and priority flow from perfection, and section 41 establishes perfection occurs when the security interest has attached. So you've got to have attachment. You have to have satisfied those other sections. But then to perfect it, you have to register it or take possession of it. So that's really what those two words mean, but they're very central concepts to the Personal Property Securities Act. So yes, fundamental lessons there, get it in writing and register it on the website or take possession of it. Okay, so any questions about any of that? Okay, so this is getting a bit more into when priority flows from. So the date of perfection is registration, not attachment. So you have to have attachment before you can have perfection. But you can actually go to the website and register something before the collateral has been acquired. So this is how that would work. So we've got this example here. So the collateral has been acquired by the debtor, the security agreement is signed, so got assent, and so attachment has occurred. So you do that on the 1st of January. On the 15th of January, you think, oh, I remember Amanda said I should go and register on the website. So on the 15th of January, you go and register it on that website. At that time, you have perfected it. So your date of perfection is going to be the 15th of January. Okay, and the date becomes important to establish priority. So if lots of other people have also registered security interests, then there's going to be a question of who is satisfied first. Okay, so that is a fairly straightforward one. So attachment has occurred before perfection. Here is example 2. So this is where you go ahead on New Year's Day and you register the financing statement. So this is before attachment has happened. So the debtor hasn't gone and bought the computer or the collateral, whatever it is. But you've registered it anyway. On the 15th of January, the collateral is acquired by the debtor and a security agreement is signed. And at that point in time, attachment has occurred. So perfection is achieved on the 15th of January, but then there's like this magical time travel thing that happens. It's backdated to the 1st of January. So do you see what's happened there? You've kind of given yourself the best protection that you can in establishing priority because you registered on the 1st of January. There's actually no collateral for that to attach to until the debtor has gone and bought it and acquired value to it. And this becomes relevant to you if you are trying to establish priority because it goes by first to register rather than by the attachment date. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, if you don't remember anything else, just remember you should go and register stuff on that website as soon as you can. That'll probably be useful information potentially. Okay, also to be aware of, there are some exceptions. So we'll just go through these briefly. This is one of the first instances of drafting in New Zealand law where they actually put examples into the Act itself. So I remember I showed you that the Contracts and Commercial Law Act, they kind of picked that up as well, but it started in here. So these examples that I've given you are actually part of the Act itself. So where a buyers or lessees take goods free of a security interest. So a buyer of collateral who acquires the collateral for value takes the collateral free of an unperfected security interest in the collateral. So this is where you've bought it, but there is a security interest on it which has not been perfected. So A has a security interest in B's car, B sells the car to C, C pays for the car before A registers the financing statement, C takes the car free of A's security interest. So the real fundamental message on that slide is you snooze, you lose, you didn't register. So, yes.
So they've registered for the sale, and it'll be fine?
Potentially. Yes, I mean there are specific rules, and there's cars kind of have a lot of separate little individual rules. So in principle, yes. I don't want you to go away and act on that, okay? But yes, so it's really like, yes, just register it and then this would never have happened. So unperfected, you lose out. And this is another instance here where it is an exception, and this is to sort of protect the smooth flow of business. So if you go into a car dealership or a business and you buy stuff, really you should actually be able to feel reasonably confident that you're going to be able to buy it and have it and it will be yours. So buyer of goods sold in the ordinary course of business of the seller takes the goods free even of a perfected security interest that is given by the seller. So even if it has been perfected, you take it free of that interest. And the sort of situation where this is going to apply is illustrated in the example here. A has a perfected security interest in B, a car dealer's inventory. So that's probably going to be a bank. So they would have registered that. B sells the car to C, who is a customer. C will take the car free of A's perfected security interest in the car. So if you're a bank, you would probably want the business to actually be able to run. So it's kind of to not impede the smooth flow of commerce here. And in this situation, when you're buying goods in the ordinary course of business, you shouldn't really have to go away and get out your phone and look up on the app to see, well, does the bank have a claim on this kind of thing? So that is another exception. And here is another one, and this one is another consumer protection instance. So remember, as consumers, we're all a bit kind of deemed to be needing extra protection. So a buyer of goods that are acquired as consumer goods takes them free of any security interest if the value of the goods did not exceed $2,000 at the time of the attachment. So this means if you are buying consumer goods for less than $2,000, the expectation is that you won't really know about the Personal Property Securities Register and that you need to go away and search for it. Obviously, I know about it and you know about it, but the average person doesn't know about it, okay? And they can't be expected to, and there's this extra bit of perfection here. So A buys a television for $999 under a hire purchase agreement from B, that's probably Noel Lemmings or someone like that, and they will register these things en masse. A sells the television to C for $500. C doesn't know about this. C will take the television free of B's security interest in the television. So Noel Lemming loses out on the television at that point. It's free of there, but that doesn't mean that they can't go after them for the debt in other ways. It's just that the collateral is lost under this exception. Okay, and then this final bit here, we're going on to priorities. So actually when you look at the Personal Property Securities Act itself, there are a lot of different little situations, which we won't go through. But I think this is the residual rule. So this applies if there isn't one of the specific situations. And this is very logical and it flows from what we were saying before. Perfected interests take priority over unperfected interests. Registered interests will take priority. If it's perfected, it goes by who is first to register or take possession. If it's unperfected, it goes by order of attachment. And that's where it becomes quite important to have that written agreement with assent, because that will have the date on it. So that helps you to establish where you are in the chain. So yes, so there are actually a number of rules in the Personal Property Securities Act which set out priority in specific situation. This applies if another rule does not. Okay, let's quickly do this revision question and then we'll finish. So a lessor leases a photocopier to a company for a 3-year term. Company secured all assets to the bank who perfect the security interest. Lessor fails to register, the company becomes insolvent. Does the lessor, that's the person who owns the photocopier, do they have priority over the photocopier, or is it the company's secured creditors? Think back to the racehorse. The secured creditors get to keep it because they registered, yeah. Okay, so I think that's probably a good point to pause. So I will record the rest of this. This is quite exciting. It's purchase money security interest. I always call them PMS.